Welcome, everyone. So happy you are here and supporting us, supporting the Noyo Center for Marine Science by being a member, or if you're not a member, Trey's put where you can donate or where you can become a member to support us. Once again, I see we are all beating the drums for support in the world of science, like never before, I suppose. But again, yeah, you can go to our website and donate to us. We bring these science talks to you. Our speakers are guests of ours, sometimes in person and often via Zoom. We've invited Andrew to come and join us here on the North Coast, and one of these days he'll get down here when all things line up. In the meantime, Dr. Andrew Trites is a professor at UBC, University of British Columbia, to our north, and is also really just shared a little cool reward awards that he was given most recently. Won the King Charles III Medal for his contribution to science, and the President's Award to around public education through outreach and just public sharing his knowledge with the public and speaking to the work that he does to all of us. So those are a couple of awards that he's received recently that are just straight to the heart and speak volumes for the work that he does and the kind of person that he is. He works very up close and personal with one of my favorite animals on the planet, the Steller sea lion. I've seen couple of his tests of his animals when I was in Vancouver at the Vancouver Aquarium, and just about fell in love with those animals. They're like a California sea lion, but they're not, because they're their own unique animal. They roar as opposed to bark, and they look a lot more bear-like, and they're just really beautiful animals. So we can see them down here, but they're a little bit more rare than our California sea lions. I encourage you to go north to see the Steller sea lions. And yeah, that's about it. If you can donate, great. Enjoy the talk this evening. And as always, we will get to the chat after Andrew has done his presentation. And I encourage you to stick around and write those questions down that come up. Last time Andrew was our guest, he spoke to some really key facts around Steller sea lion research that he was doing around population and whatnot, and I found it totally fascinating. And here tonight, he brings us some new knowledge around killer whales. So how cool is that? We are so blessed and so fortunate to have Andrew join us this evening. Enjoy the talk, and thanks for being here again.
Well, thank you, Sarah. And thank you all for joining us here on a Tuesday evening. As Sarah mentioned, I've got a soft spot for the Noyo Center and a soft spot for Fort Bragg, and that's all due to Mark and his generosity to support research. And I'm sure many of you know that he aspired once to be a marine biologist, but turned out his biochemistry and his ability to make beer won out in the end, but he's never lost that boyhood passion for marine biology, hence the logos and things of the marine mammals and the connection to me, my students, and my lab. And so I am the beneficiary, or I should say marine mammals are the beneficiary through my lab, through the Marine Mammal Center in Sausalito, and through the Noyo Center. And I hope that others around the world follow that sort of example to give back in a way. And probably it's no more important than today, given that, you know, our source for government support, which is what funds most marine mammal work, unfortunately, with this rapid change in our economy, those sources of money are going to be drying up, and we're going to be increasingly reliant on donations and foundations. So I'm very indebted to Mark, and it's a pleasure to be back, although I'd hoped to be there in person. But here I am once again online 3 years later with a slightly different story to tell you this time. And I'm just going to start by sharing my screen. Oh, I just want to say thank you for those that have your cameras on. I'm teaching undergrad students online, and I have this thing where I have them all have their cameras on. And it's one of the few classes where they do it. But I say, I want to create a safe, inclusive space. And the way we connect is with eye contact and facial expressions. And the students at the end of the term just write, that's the only class where we did this. And it's the only class I felt like I belonged. And it makes such a difference. And probably one doesn't realize it quite so much unless you're speaking to a blank screen. You feel like you're talking to the wall and you see no reaction. So I think it is about building a community, and we can build this community online, as I can see you've done here through the Know Your Center in this series of talks. Okay, let me share my screen and kick this talk up. So it was billed as 5 new discoveries about orcas, and I've inserted West Coast because the pace with which research is occurring on killer whales around the world is just phenomenal. I probably get an email once a day from a student that says, I want to come and be a graduate student and study killer whales. They really have captured people's imaginations. And I've been doing more research in more recent years, including I've had 3 just phenomenal students focused on killer whale questions. The background to marine mammals here, I think you recognize most of these as frequent within the California current system. And on here, most of my career has been way down here with these little tiny animals. And I've been looking more recently with the Guadalupe fur seals, their recovery. They were hunted to the point of near extinction, and we're now tracking their recovery. I've been working with mostly researchers in Mexico, where the breeding colonies currently exist. Worked a lot on Alaska northern fur seals, as Sarah mentioned, stellar sea lions. The sea bears of the ocean are really the lions, the true lions, because they do roar and they don't bark incessantly and annoy you. It really is a noble call. California sea lions, to understand why they're booming in California, but they're declining in Mexico. They're in real trouble here in Mexico. Oh, and by the way, for full disclosure, I am in Mexico at the moment. I just gave that away. In addition to being a professor in Canada, I'm an honorary professor in Mexico in La Paz. And so I'm working with graduate students and the faculty here and trying to link. So much of my career was spent in Alaska, northern BC. But of course, BC is at the transition zone between the Gulf of Alaska, our northern species, and uh, the California current system, which is what connects you in particular to me in Vancouver, as well as to those in Mexico. So that's where I spent a lot of my time. And then more recently, I've been devoting a lot of time here to killer whales. And in part because for me, I've always enjoyed science, but I do it through the lens of being an ecological detective. I wanted to understand everything from why northern fur seals were declining to why stellar sea lions were declining, the increase of harbor seals and the impact on salmon, and then more recently, just trying to sort out what is going on with killer whales. We've got some populations that are increasing, some that are declining, and while there's been a long body of research, we're learning new things about them. So, well, I've got the one animal here circled. We now recognize that we've got at least 4 ecotypes of killer whales along our coast. And while they do look physically different in very, very subtle ways, um, they're more distinctive in terms of their behavior, their diets, life history patterns. So here at the top, I put the resident killer whale, named originally because they showed up repeatedly in the same areas in British Columbia, and they were literally like residents. You could count on them. And then we had another type here, the transients. They were in smaller groups in 2s and 3s. They were always on the go. You might see them one year, but not another, but they behave very differently. So they were labeled transient, an animal that was in transit. They've also been named Biggs killer whales. And so we use Biggs, named after Michael Bigg, who was the first to do in-depth studies on killer whales and or call them transients. And then we have another group called the offshore killer whales. And more recently, I published a paper with one of the grad students in my lab, Josh McInnes, and he picked up a really strange thing with some different whales that didn't fit any of these other 3 ecotypes, and we've called them the oceanic killer whales. And they still are largely a mystery group, but they appear to be distinct from these others. The offshores, again, you can see that as the name's capturing the fact that they occur offshore. And there's only been a few literally found that are washed ashore dead. And the most amazing thing with them was to find that their teeth were ground down near to the gum line because they appear to be specializing in eating sharks, which has got very rough skin. And livers and sharks are very, very nutritious, but they pay a price in trying to extract them. They also seem to specialize in taking tuna as the other key species. I'm just talk briefly here about transients, and probably another time or perhaps someone like Josh McInnes could come and just tell you some of the amazing things we learned about transient killer whales. And the most recent thing, we've submitted a paper where the transients specialize in, as you can see in this picture, eating only marine mammals. They don't like fish at all. They only eat marine mammals. And we've got a population that goes from California up to Southeast Alaska. And even within this population, we now think there might be two subpopulations. One we're calling the inner coast and one the outer coast. And most in your area or neck of the woods, you've got outer coast. And that's in part, even though they seem like they're very close to the coast, but it really reflects the fact that you've got like Monterey Bay, where the really deep water, the shelf break comes in literally next to shore. But the feeding behavior to capture marine mammals that specialize in shelf break areas is different from the feeding behavior of marine mammals that feed in shallow coastal waters, such as the seals. And so we're making new discoveries there. But that would be for another time. Really, today, I want to focus on the resident killer whales. And these were the first studied groups, I'd say, in the world. And it's become the basis for a lot of the research that happens elsewhere. And here, with this fish, is to indicate that unlike many of these other populations, well, unlike them, they are also specialized, but they're specialized in eating fish. And one of the prime fish that they consume is the Chinook salmon. It dominates their diet. It's the largest of 5 species of salmon, and one which used to be extremely abundant in California over 100 years ago. The Sacramento River, the Klamath River, and by some accounts, over half of all the Chinook salmon used to come from California and Oregon. And today, it's just a remnant of what it once was. So the southern resident killer whales, I'll tell you a little bit more about their range. They frequent areas where we have a lot of encounters with people. The thing with the residents is that if you are born into a resident pod, and these pods tend to be quite large with many individuals in it, but should you be born a son, you have this strange attachment to your mom. And killer whales, so you can imagine yourselves, those of you that have had sons, well, the downside to having a son is that you will stay with your mother, or you'll have your son for the rest of your life, in large part because mom's cooking is just so good. You can stay big and fat without having to do a whole lot of extra work. And in mom's case, within a killer whale pod, the evolutionary biologists are suggesting that there's an advantage because moms who've got big sons that are well fed are likely going to have more grandkids ultimately. And so there's an advantage there. Now, maybe some of you can relate to that. I don't know. We can deal with that during question period. On the other hand, if you were a daughter, well, your fate is sealed too. You will eventually break off and form your own pod with your sons and daughters, and ultimately keep your sons too for the rest of your life. So it's one of the unique things about their behavior. It's nothing that I've discovered, but it's through the dedicated research of many other people that have put these stories together. This is a map here showing, you can see Southeast Alaska at the top, and coming down here, Haida Gwaii in British Columbia, Vancouver Island. And on here, I've indicated the range of the northern resident killer whales. So resident killer whales, we've got 2 distinct populations, the northern and the southern. And I've indicated here areas where they occur frequently and less frequently here in the other shaded areas. So there's currently 341 and the population is increasing. They're there to feed on Chinook salmon. And of course, if you're going to feed on Chinook salmon, when we talk about the habitat needs, well, there are two parts of habitat. One is the marine habitat, which is a no-brainer. But I think we all need to recognize that river habitat is just so important because the Chinook salmon go into fresh water, go up these rivers to spawn. If that habitat's not protected, then there is no food for them ultimately. And so to me, this is a better representation of killer whale habitat, is to show both the rivers they depend on as well as the ocean areas. So what about for southern resident killer whales? And for them, I'll show you a similar map. And here you can see that they use the southern part of Vancouver Island consistently, and look how far south they go, way past you, all the way down. And it appears then that their movements is primarily summer and fall up here, and then the winter time down to California. And it appears that they used to go regularly to San Francisco for Christmas holidays because there were winter runs of Chinook salmon that came in to spawn at that time of the year, which when I tell people that today, they think it's not possible, it's a fantasy. But we lost those runs in the 1800s due to logging, gold mining, the damming, diversion of waters, draining of marshes for farming. And there's efforts now to try to restore them, but it may be too little too late. And in terms of the river systems, well, let me show you how much more river systems they depend on. Some of these fish go way, way, way inland, going across a couple of state borders. And here you can see by the number 73. So about 4 times smaller than what we have here for the northern resident killer whales. When we overlap the distributions of these two populations, you can see here that the most significant overlap is here around Vancouver Island. And the most interesting thing is that these two groups of killer whales do not interact. They're not kissing cousins. They keep their distance, and there's spots where there's hydrophones that listen, and they've never heard the two groups calling together at the same time. But you will on one day get one southerns perhaps, and next day northerns at a given site. So they keep their distance. They are in competition, although they share so much in common in terms of diet, fish, hunting, family structure. So they are distant, distant, distant cousins, but there is some evidence of competition between them and the possibility that the northerns are pushing south. And that's bad news for the southern resident killer whales. So you may have read things about the decline of southern resident killer whales. They make the news in British Columbia and Washington State. We hear so much about them. But the thing is that not everybody's seen the numbers. And so I thought, well, let me show you a graph of the numbers. So here, I'm only going to go back to, I think it's 1972, because I have the same data for the northern residents. But over this past 10, 20, 30, 40 years, and we have data back to 1960, this is what their numbers look like. So let me compare that to the northern resident killer whales. And so for the same time period, this is what their numbers have done. So it's so different. Both these populations depend on Chinook salmon. Chinook salmon have declined everywhere from California up to Alaska. And yet this northern residents seem to be contending with it by growing. And the southerns have been low and apparently at carrying capacity for possibly over a century. So some of the theories, well, prey shortages, a lack of salmon, and there is evidence suggesting that they are food limited based on body sizes, but it's not clear where that's occurring. If you read reports in the news, you would think that it's occurring in British Columbia, in Puget Sound, in the Salish Sea, in Washington State. That's where all the research attention is focused. There's some evidence of contaminants, evidence of disturbance noise. Inbreeding is a big problem. But the bottom line is that we're not 100% sure what the problem is. You can see that the numbers have been kept low, but why are they low? And how come the northerns aren't constrained in the same way that the southerns are? So the first thing I got involved in here was something we've done a lot of work on, largely with our sea lions, was looking at the nutritional consequences of not getting enough to eat, the energetic consequences, as well as linking um, marine mammals to prey abundance. So we chartered this vessel. It was one of the first whale watching boats in British Columbia to go out to ask the question, are they getting enough salmon? So the way we did this was to estimate using some of the most expensive fish finders you could find, as well as taking CTD casts. So here at the bottom is something that measures salinity, temperature, and depth. So we can get profiles of the water column. And then we try to relate that to using this hydrophone with transducers to determine where Chinook are present and to count the numbers of fish. And nobody done this before. There's just an assumption that numbers have gone down. There's not enough here, but we decided to go out and actually measure what was there. Inside the bridge here, got a couple of screens on the far right. You can see one that's showing the track lines that we preset, and then you're getting the scan here on the left, just as if you've been on a boat with a fish finder. And so just to visualize this, the ship is sailing over a given area, and you can pick up the bottom of the ocean bouncing back at you, and then targets in there. And some of these single targets here, we can identify as being Chinook. And we did some ground testing we worked both with fishermen to catch fish, to ground truth what we're seeing, as well as with trawlers as well to work this out. On the far right, you see a big red blotch, and that would be herring in this case, a massive school of herring. So we did a couple of tests here. One was, so this is Vancouver Island, and we chose some areas in here where we wanted to see how many fish were available in this area. So remember, southern residents, there's currently 73 whales in it, and we wanted to see how many fish were available to them during summer when the whales are present, and wanted to compare it to the northern resident killer whale habitat, where almost all the research has been conducted on northern residents, and we chose our study areas there. And we came up with a prediction, and probably you can come up with the same prediction. If you were to go to these areas and whales are there feeding, which area do you think has got more fish in it? Where we've got the large population northern resident killer whales, or the smaller population of southern resident killer whales? So we assumed we were going to find fewer fish south. And that's what we read in our newspapers. That's what people have been saying. And when we did the estimates and came back, we were really shocked because we found there's actually 4 to 6 times more Chinook available to the southern residents. This is during summer and into the fall. It wasn't what we had expected. And of course, in science, when you find something you don't expect, you look at the data 10 times harder because you're sure you made a mistake. And it came back, no, the results were sound. We then did a follow-up study with this. In this case, we worked with sport fishing guides and whale watching captains to identify hotspot areas where both people catch more fish as well as where we see killer whales feeding. And here we did in a very fine scale. So instead of going all the way across Juan de Fuca Strait, we went into these small areas. And once again, we found there was more fish here in the south than there was in the north. So those 2 papers were published, and I'll give you a link at the end should any of you wish to read about them. And so we have those 2 findings out. So from here then, our conclusion is that the southern resident killer whales are not food limited during summer, and the prevalence of fish is 2 to 6 times higher in their habitat. We still think that they are food limited. And in fact, I'm pointing the finger at you in California. And I think that the limitation has been there for over 100 years. And they've been low for 100 years because the Chinook were destroyed in the California rivers. And so I've got a graduate student now compiling. In fact, when I gave my talk about sea lions, somebody in the group mentioned some canneries. And so we've been working with cannery records and compiling, actually estimating from numbers of cans that were sold, how many fish used to come back to the California rivers. So she's doing her master's degree, and it's really insightful as we're now looking at what did the pantry look like for killer whales back in 1880 compared to today, comparing both northern and southern habitats. So that's one of my five findings I wanted to share with you. And so I guess the last part of that is the moral of the story is that my hope from this is that it'll get researchers to look at other places at other times of the year, recognizing that it's not just Salish is very important during summer and fall, but there's a weak link somewhere, and it doesn't appear to be in BC. Yes, Chinook have gone down, but there's more than enough Chinook in the summer and fall to support them. Another finding we had in here is that we found that the resident orcas are spending most of their time searching for Chinook near the surface, which was kind of surprising because we think of whales as being deep divers and catching fish down at depth. And there's a lot of research is focused on depth and noise at depth. And interesting here is that we've got some information here that indicating that this is consistent with the migratory movements of adult Chinook. And I'll just show you. So we had put some tags onto killer whales, and I'll show you a couple of graphs. So we've got tags that are basically like Fitbits. So instead of putting a watch on your wrist, we can use suction cups to put a Fitbit on the back of a whale. And from this, we can calculate the depths and movements of them. And so on here, we've got data, I'm trying to remember, this is about 5,000 dives from 11 whales. And here, this is plotted on a log scale. And so we're going here, this is 1 meter, that's about 3 feet deep. And here we're going to 6 feet, 9 feet. But you see then that most of the dives here that we're recording are really shallow. They're only about 6 feet deep. We've then got a little bump out here at the 20-meter depth. So that'll be about 60 feet deep. And then we have a scattering of dives going down, some really deep, 100 meters, 110, 120 meters. But overall, most of these dives are really shallow. These are for adult males. We did the same thing with juveniles and found the same sort of pattern. So overall, for killer whales, they're probably not going to make the Olympic team for deep diving. We'll leave that for maybe the sperm whales or the beaked whales. But 90% of the dives are shallow and they're less than a minute. And the longest dive we recorded was 8.5 minutes. Again, doesn't seem like a record. You think about the elephant seals, they go down for like over an hour on one breath. If we take these graphs, and I'm just going to turn them sideways, and this is the same graph I just showed you, but here what I'm plotting is the dive depth. So you can see this as being like the surface of the ocean coming down deeper, deeper, deeper. So very few dives down deep. And this is just the number of dives we recorded. And so you see then they're saying pretty close to the surface. And we had, with another part of our study, we were tracking Chinook. We caught Chinook and we put tags onto them. And then we had acoustic arrays set up to follow the fish into the rivers. And from here, we were able to make a few conclusions. And I guess first I'm marking out here is the fact that we worked with students in statistics, and they were assigning behaviors to these different dive types and movement patterns. So we had the very top resting, maybe I just come back up here, just point out that at the very top here, we've got this little bump here where they're resting right at the surface. We then got primarily traveling. We've got searching for prey at this depth, and then pursuit and foraging as they're chasing fish. So from the swim depths, we found that most of the fish that we were tracking, they stayed really shallow. And these are migratory fish. They're going back to rivers. They need to smell the fresh water, which is near the surface. So it's in their interest to be close to the surface to smell their way home. The mean depth here was 22 meters. And you can see here, that's exactly where we have this corresponding bump here. And it appears to be where the whales are primarily searching. And then when they find a fish, the fish escapes, goes down deep. And hence we have the scattering here of depths where they didn't go down to find the fish, but they follow them to depths where they captured them. So conclusion then is that the Chinook appear to travel near the surface while migrating. But we also found that when we go into these hotspot areas where the risk of predation is higher, they seem to use the deeper water And the killer whales seem to use a different hunting strategy when they get into these nearshore areas where the fish are being more constrained. Okay, so that's all some of the things we've learned about Chinook salmon and behaviors. And again, we're the first to go out and actually try to measure where the fish are, how the fish are behaving, and link predatory behaviors to them. Let me give you a second finding, which is orcas only need one breath between dives. And you're probably thinking, like, why is that news? Well, the thing in science is that and I'll explain in a minute why this even matters. But it turns out that while some researchers sort of know this intuitively, nobody's ever gone out to measure it. And we have from our tags the ability to know how many dives they've done. We can work out their activities, but we want to know how many breaths do they take, because we wanted to use the numbers of breaths as a proxy for energy expenditure. So we're trying to estimate for the whales we were tracking, how many calories were they burning? But we can't measure their metabolisms because unlike an athlete that might be on a bicycle or running with a tube in their mouth, the whales don't do that. But we know that typically animals that work harder breathe harder or breathe more rapidly. So we wanted to use breaths as a proxy for energy expenditure. So we use drones to fly overhead. And we use these tags I mentioned to you earlier. And one is shown here. And these tags are fancy Fitbits. Now, the electronics is very small. The bigger part of this package is flotation. The suction cups are typically what you use for a rooftop rack. And they're designed to pop onto a whale and pop off again. And you put them on using a very, very long pole. And while this tag doesn't weigh very much, I guarantee when it's on the end of a long pole that it feels like it's 500 pounds. It is so heavy. It's just unbelievable. And there were not many people we could find that could even lift it and to put on the whales. But that they did, and we were very efficient at being able to pop these tags onto the backs. And there's a camera on board so we can watch the videos. We've got three-dimensional accelerometers so we can measure movement. We can measure light levels. We can measure sound, water temperature, depth. It's just amazing what we can learn. And of course, we had to recover the tags, and that was looking for a needle in a haystack. And here, our skipper there found the tag, is handing it back to us. And then the most amazing thing was getting to sit in the galley and look at Orca TV, where we would get to ride along to see what the whales were seeing and experience it with them. And I'm going to share a little bit of that footage with you in just a little bit. So the breath part of this was discovered they are just doing one breath per dive. When they're resting, we can do it as a rate about 1.2 to 1.3 breaths per minute. When they're traveling foraging, about 1.5 to 1.8 breaths per minute. But it turns out that they weren't using a whole lot more energy to travel and forage. So they're very efficient at how they use their energy. And for comparisons, you wonder, like, it seems like it's not a very fast breathing rate, and it's not. It's very slow. Of course, they do have big lungs as well. But compared to humans, when we're resting, we're doing about 15 breaths per minute and running about 40 to 60 breaths per minute. And so again, very, very efficient as they can get by with just like 1.5 breaths per minute when they're exercising. So this is another paper we published titled Killer Whale Respiration Rates. And it was led by a summer student that worked in our lab, and it became her first publication as well. Although she discovered the publication process took literally like 3.5 years. She was long finished her degree. And it was just like one of the things about science is it's never done till it's done. And it's very long. And this paper is also available on our website if you're interested. So I kind of alluded to why respiration rates matter. And that's because we use it to determine prey requirements. How much food do they need? How many salmon do they need to eat per day? And to get at that, we've got a whole host of things that we have to estimate. We need to know how much time they spend looking for food, hunting, resting. We have that now from our tags. We need a measure of metabolic rates, so how many calories they're burning on average, and that we're using the uh, breathing rates for that. So we now have an estimate of that. we need to have an estimate of body mass at age because bigger animals need more food. And I'll tell you about how we're getting that. We need to know the numbers present, and that we've got, as I showed you from the earlier graphs, they are well census, so we know how many are there. We're able to know, we've taken whole fish and ground them up to know how many calories are in different fish. And Chinook are very complicated, but we've worked that piece out. And finally, we've got a bioenergetics model. So the green ones are the pieces we've already completed, and we're still working on the two yellow ones and getting very close to wrapping this part of the project up. For body mass at age, it's possible to use drones to take pictures and from the air and then measure body length. And these drone images are being used to not only get body length measurements, but also the width. And from that, you can assess body condition of animals. You can also identify pregnant animals because no, they're not fat, they are pregnant. You see the bulge on them. So in our case, we needed to turn these lengths into weights. And the only people that have these sorts of data turns out to be wildlife parks such as SeaWorld. So I approached SeaWorld and asked if they would collaborate. And to my great pleasure, they've sent us all the data from every animal they've ever held. And so we are now working out growth curves for killer whales. And they've collected so many measurements and the entire life histories of animals. So I'm hoping to have these results come out later this year. But it's an amazing data set, and we're hoping this will be used for killer whales all around the world for all the different populations. We'll finally have proper growth models for them, which is key to using to figure out how much food do they need and are they getting enough. Activity budgets. I'll just show you something else here that we've done. Here, I'm going to show you the depths of dives and then a time series going for like 20 hours of recording. And so we'll just start here at the top one. And so here, over a 20-hour period, you see we've got some fairly shallow dives up here in this 20-meter zone. Got a few deep dives down here at 100, and a few more deep ones out here, even down to like 300 meters, so extremely deep. And then we were able to categorize them into shallow, medium, deep, and logging is a type of resting behavior. And do the same thing down here for another group here in terms of identifying the actual behaviors. So a lot of this was statistical magic, but the most interesting to me is to see that over a 20-hour period, you see that they only made 11 deep dives, or this one animal did. And so again, it sort of reinforced the point that most of their time is spent hunting in the shallows, or shallow waters, but that they do pursue prey down here to depth, but they don't go down looking for prey at depth, unlike perhaps a humpback whale, a blue whale, a fin whale. It's a very different strategy. And then in terms of models, we've already done quite a few here for different marine mammal species, including the stellar sea lions. We've got a great one now that's in review for the gray whales. And it's really fast to see just how much food they must consume in the Arctic to come south to fast before they go back north. And we're seeing this year in particular in Mexico, some really strange gray whale behaviors where they're coming further south, they're coming into the Sea of Cortez, place where no one's ever seen them before. There's something very odd this year about gray whale behavior. Okay, moving on to discovery number 4. And here I've got things aren't always what they appear. And to this, I want to show you a Far Side cartoon. Now, interesting is when I talk about Far Side to my undergraduate students, they have no idea what I'm talking about. I'm hoping some of you are my generation and you too appreciated Gary Larson's humor. But the one that I thought of the first time I watched the killer whale footage was this one here, where the cows are doing normal cow activity until one yells out car, and then they switch into what we think is normal cow behavior until the car is gone, and then go back to being cows again. And I had the impression that I spent most of my time here looking at cows this way or killer whales this way, and I've been missing something. So here in this picture, I'm showing you just one of the tags here at the bottom end, but we actually had 2 tags in this In this pod, this was D pod, one of the northern resident pods. And I'm going to show you some different footage, some aerial images. I'm going to start first here. As you can see, a tag over here and the red tag over here. These are actually two brothers. And they were hanging out together. So we put two tags on. And a few things, I know the first time I saw drone footage, to see the saddle patches in a way I've never seen them before, because we always just see them from the side, but from above, or in this case, if you were underwater with them, you would perceive them in such a different way. It's not clear what the significance of these markings are, but presumably they're able to identify each other just by looking at the shapes of the saddle patches. You can see their eye patches up here as well. There's our tag again and our other tag over here. So a lot of this footage we used to validate the breathing rates as we were going through and coding everything and compare it to the tag data. So what does it look like if you were in the water swimming with them? And here I've got some footage. One thing you notice is the skin looks quite different underwater compared to when they break the surface. You also notice a lot of nicks and scarring as they've been banging in and touching each other. And I was just struck by the extent to which they maintain physical contact with each other. And touching in this sort of way while traveling and resting seems to be a very important part of keeping these family bonds very tight. You see a juvenile grafting down here under its mom. We saw them nursing while they're traveling. We're capturing things that I've never noticed before from the surface. So you might think that this is normal life, but the reality is, so when we got the footage back, we kind of had this agreement on board that nobody would look at it without others being present. Except that I got up at about 4 a.m. the first night and I snuck into the galley and I just had to see it. And I sat there for like hours watching this until the sun came up. And the thing is that struck me is what I was seeing, you'll see in just a minute, wasn't this sort of footage here of like this ballet symphony. What I saw was this. You can hear the calls. I'm not sure how well it's coming through. Some clicks. But I swear that like over 90% of the time, they were just in complete darkness. They would break the surface. And it leaves you wondering, like, how do they navigate? Like, I need to see the bottom, I need to see shore, I have to have some physical markers, but for them, most of life is like this. It's dark, it's quiet, they can hear each other. And they can also touch each other when they're close. So that's the reality is that most of the time. But then we also caught other times when we had more light up near the surface. And here on the far right, you'll see a mother and her calf. And this is sort of my Gary Larson moment to give you a sense here of the stuff that we never see from the surface. And so and baby wants to have, whoops. I'm not going to send that. Baby wants to have its belly rubbed. Now, isn't that like the cutest thing? That's not scientific to say, but the truth is, like, we were just in awe watching this. And the extent to which moms, dote on their offspring, and probably grandmothers do too, just as much. But then look, it's time to breathe because someone just yelled car or boat. And here they come up like the way that we always take pictures of them. And we have no idea what they were doing underwater. But they're doing all sorts of things between these single breaths. Here's another fun thing, just watching mom and an offspring. The bottom, we've got the whale upside down with one swimming underneath it. What else can I point out to you? We've got a mom and her juvenile over here. And I really like this about the young one coming in and just whacking mom on the head. It's also carrying a piece of fish in its mouth and just the playfulness that they have together. And a lot of these interactions are building these very strong social bonds between individuals and family members. It's sort of like, mom can push the cab along, just like, wee, and it's the things that we just don't see when you're just sitting in a boat looking across at whales. Okay. Number 5, my last of amazing things, is about white-sided dolphins. And we've often encountered resident killer whales with dolphins. We know that transients eat them. And we've seen white-sided dolphins in with residents who do not eat them. And so I've always made the assumption, as have others, that white-sided dolphins, they just want to get revenge on any killer whale. And they know these ones aren't going to eat them, so they're just there to harass them and make their lives miserable because they're in all around them. And so that's what we thought. But then because we had the underwater tags, we got to see things that nobody's seen before. And we came away with a very different conclusion after analyzing the data. And we've written a paper, which is not yet published, and saying that these fish-eating orcas are hunting cooperatively with dolphins. They're working together. And it's just like amazing. And that's not what we thought from the surface. So here, I'll just show you a little bit of footage. And so in front of this whale, who's being escorted by dolphins, you're going to see a big chunk of fish come to it that's been caught by another whale. And we've got hours of this sort of footage as well, showing these sorts of interactions. And I'll show you here that other animal coming up with a fish in its mouth and just bit it in half. And then the scraps that are coming off the broken fish. And another dolphin coming in. So let me show you the sort of track we would get. And so here we've got from the surface, and this is just over about a 30-minute stretch, I guess is what I've got on here. Sorry, 11 o'clock. Yeah, about that. Anyway, what we've got on here is what we'd see is that the dolphins would lead the dive and the whale would follow and come down to depth and come back again to the surface, again with the dolphins coming up, leading it up. And then we had, in this case here, just showing you here, there's a pursuit here at the surface and some fragments. We've got another dive down here coming down deep, and we did see a capture here and being brought up to the surface. But what we think is going on here, and here we've got acoustic recordings. So it seems that the dolphins that their mouths are too small to catch and eat an adult Chinook. But they're going down, they're acting as scouts, they're fanning out in front of the whale. They are echolocating and they can find the fish. And the killer whale goes quiet. The killer whale is not echolocating, it is listening. It's receiving all the sounds bouncing back and it is interpreting it. So it's using information from the dolphin's calling to find the location of the fish. It makes the kill, it brings it up. The whale doesn't share, the whale doesn't say thank you or anything. What happens is the whale brings it up and it's going to share with another pod member. But the payoff is that the dolphins get scraps. And so it works out. The killer whales, if they're bothered by the presence of the dolphins, they could leave at any point. But it clearly it's mutually beneficial to both for this to be occurring. And how it is that they know the difference between residents and transients, we have no idea even how this came about, but we saw it occurring repeatedly. And we've got lots of echolocations and analyzing all the sounds from the tags, and we can match up photos to these different time events. So it's really quite a remarkable story, and just some of the things that we've concluded from it. So it's something which is just amazing. Although for other killer whale researchers spent their whole lives out the whales, they've never seen it, so they have a hard time accepting. But we collected data in a way that others haven't. So in brief here, just wrapping up, this was some of our crew. We collected a lot of this data during COVID. It meant that the only way we could do our research is we couldn't stay on land. We had to all live on a boat for like 3 weeks. We had to share bunks. It was just like tight, but we all got along. Nobody got sick, and we collected an amazing data set. Um, I want to thank you. This is our website. And again, I just want to put a pitch out for Stellar IPA. I'm very, very appreciative for what Mark and others have done and the commitment of the Noya Center for supporting researchers and educating the public about the importance of saving our marine life. Thank you very much.
Bravo. Oh my goodness, what an absolute treat. And there you get to see the importance of the work that we are doing. To see this footage and to dive in deep with this kind of work is just, I mean, here we are, this intimate group of people doing this, watching this, and it's community, and it's so darn important. Wow. I'm sure there are questions. Let's see. Karen was wondering if you wouldn't mind describing what you saw when the calf was nursing.
Yeah,
Um,
so essentially what you're seeing is, mother swimming and the calf is drafting under her. So in the same way we see gray whales going north with the calves, that the mothers are able to almost drag their calf along. So the calf doesn't have to swim very hard. It's the same way like in bicycle races, when you see like the Tour de France and you've got bicyclists like drafting behind another one because they break the wind and they just suck them along. So the killer whales are doing the same thing. And then we just see the cab right up there where the teats are and just sort of attached, not for long bouts, but short, coming in and back again. So I'm not aware that anybody's recorded that, or I haven't heard anybody even talking about like, when are they nursing? We certainly see it with sea lions and seals, but we don't pay too much thought about so. But yeah, the killer whales seem to be like dashing and dining, or dining and dashing, and you know, drinking on the run.
of that whale milk that is what, 50% fat instead of like 2 to 5% fat, like a
It's
dozen.
certainly very high, and typically with most milk and marine mammals, it's extremely high. It's just like a whipping cream milkshake early on, and then it gets leaner as the calves get older. And I don't know what it is at the point that we're watching them.
Uh-huh. Let's see, I think I saw, okay, Marcella's just, I recognize the data that you got from SeaWorld is invaluable, but is there any plan to stop the containment of killer whales?
Yeah, I don't know what the long-term plans are. It's interesting. I know there's strong emotions about keeping marine mammals in captivity, whether it's a killer whale, a dolphin, or a seal or a sea lion. And what a lot of people don't appreciate is that, so much of what we know about marine mammals came from, sadly from whaling. And a lot has come from animals in captivity. We've been able to get data, not me personally, but others, about eyesight, the ability to see, the ability to hear, doing all these sorts of tests. So it has provided invaluable data set. I'd say the trend has been to see facilities rescuing animals that can't survive and providing them a home. And I think there's a lot of support for that. But there's not support, I'd say, in terms of keeping them for entertainment and running them that way. So public sentiment is changing, although there is an increase in interest in China, for example, to build large aquariums and hold whales in particular. But anyway, things are changing, and but I don't know what the long-term plans are, other than to know that many parks are being regulated out by changes in city statutes and provincial, federal, state laws as well. So,
Um, I'll bet you could guess what these next two questions might be. So we're Wendy's wondering if you might have a little bit more insight in terms of the killer whales with the salmon hats. And also following that up with insight to the attacking and damaging yachts
Right.
player.
So,
I knew you would guess those two questions.
no,
Those made a
not necessarily. So the salmon hat was, this was seen in Puget Sound where one whale had a salmon on his head. I think it was a chum salmon when this was occurring. And to me, it was just like a party tricks that a killer whale was doing. I think there are some people that interpret it as having a much more significance. It was crying out to the world, look, there's a problem, we don't have enough food. But the reality is that if animals are playing with their food, and I would put this in the category of playing, it's a sign that they're probably very well fed. They would rather, they're so well fed that they're going to play as opposed to eat it because they're not hungry. This year in particular, the species they were feeding was chum salmon. So, well, I was talking about how the Chinook is their bread and butter. It's the largest of the salmon species. It's available year round. But in the fall, chum salmon is also very high in fat, and they are super abundant. They come in over about a 3-week period. And we're seeing evidence that the presence of killer whales coming into the Salish Sea is driven at that time of the year in November by chum salmon. So I think it was just an indication of, if anything, I see that as a good sign. If you can afford to play with your food, you can probably take that dinner plate away now. You've had enough to eat. I think that's what was going on. And then the question came down to, are they going to teach other whales to do it? Is this going to be copycat behavior? It had been seen, I can't remember now if it was like 20 or 30 years prior. So it probably was a short-lived fad and may well be another short-lived fad. But, the reality is that today, almost everybody has a cell phone that takes pictures, and some have now got pretty good lenses on them. And so, I don't know, I think if a whale sneezes, someone's going to get a picture of it and turn it in. I get contacted by journalists so often because somebody took a picture of a whale. They were on, I don't know, walking on the shore, they're on a kayak, and people are just in awe of seeing this footage. And so I get contacted quite a bit by these sorts of images. Now, as for the sailboats, again, that was being interpreted as it was revenge of the killer whales, and they were out to, exact a toll from overfishing. But where the story sort of falls apart is they weren't attacking. In fact, I objected. Were attack. They were targeting. They were not targeting fishing boats that catch tuna. These are the population there specializes in feeding on tuna. And so they weren't having any interactions with the tuna boats. They were interacting with sailboats. And in this case, I think it was playful behavior. Um, I think again, a sign that they're getting enough to eat. And in some cases, they're stealing tuna off the long line gear. But for the sailboats, I think it was literally like grab on with your teeth, and it's like wee as the boat pulls you along. But the reality is that they're so strong and that they were pulling the rudders off and then water's getting in. So there's no intentional forethought into sinking a vessel. It was causing damage through bad play behavior. They were slamming into the boats with their bodies, and I think it's like a cessation that their skin's very sensitive, sort of rubbing on them, pushing them. I think really it was bad play behavior that they were teaching each other to do. And but if you're on the boat, there's no doubt you are being attacked, is how you saw it. And I'm not sure if you've ever been up to a killer whale when it's in full speed, but they can be really terrifying. We typically see them sort of slow and majestic and beautiful, but I know I've been on a couple of boats where we've had whales like pursuing boats because they want to ride the bow wakes, other things that come in very close, and you see the sheer power of them. So I do feel for the people in those sailboats. I would not want to be sailing my boat and then become targeted by members of this pod. There is software where they're keeping track of them. When does this typically start? We're coming up to the season now when the tuna start coming in, and we'll start hearing the reports again. It appears that it's not going to go away. It's going to continue, and then boaters have a choice of, I mean, people are trying different things, trying to deter it. Everything from playing heavy metal music to them thinking, I hate it, they're going to hate it even worse. No. And even people talking about other things they're trying to do. So it's still a work in progress, but I think it is bad play behavior is what it is.
Interesting. Yeah, it was fun to see Mike DeRoos there with you. I assume he was maybe
Yes.
flying the drone or
No, no.
no.
Mike is the one who's super strong. He does rock climbing. And I forgot that you know Mike as well. Yeah. So Mike, I first met him. He was an undergraduate student. I was teaching marine mammal course. And the project he did in the course was he built a sea otter, put a sea otter skeleton together. That was the first one he did. And then he started volunteering up in Telegraph Cove and Vancouver Island, and he built some other skeletons. And then I hired him to build skeletons for me at the university. And then we did a blue whale together. And so I've done a lot of work with him. And then Mike, he wanted to be, well, he trained as a biologist. And so he's got a very good ability. So he's worked in many of our field trips because he's super calm, smart, and plus he's strong, which you need to do this. So yeah, he's perfect for us. So he helped put all those tags on.
I love that. I thought maybe that's what he was doing.
Yeah.
For any of you in the audience that don't know, Mike DeRoos and Michi Main, Mike's wife, are the folks that Sheila called right after they finished said blue whale for UBC. If you're ever up there in Vancouver, go look at the blue whale exhibit at UBC at the Beatty Museum. It's exceptionally beautifully exhibited there and well worth a trip to Vancouver for many reasons. Mike and Michi came and helped us put together our killer whale that you can see at the Discovery Center with that incredibly beautiful posture going after, perhaps in that case, a harbor seal posture where it's just in pursuit, right? And you can read that as soon as you see that killer whale. So that was Mike DeRoos there in some
And I call Mike the Michelangelo of whale skeletons. It's
beautiful.
like he has this ability to, yeah, I've seen skeletons all over the world, and almost all of them look like they're totally dead. They're just static. And Mike is able to breathe life, and you can just imagine like just a snapshot captured a moment in time. And in addition to the blue whale UBC, we've got like dolphins swimming down a staircase and a sea lion going up one, and they're just sort of magical to have them in our workspace.
Absolutely. I mean, it's amazing how, I mean, it's just so known that marine mammals bring this thing to our hearts and our minds that they're so fascinating. And to see, like Andrew's saying, these skeletons that in posture, because we're not built to go and watch them. And some of the capture with the killer whales and the dolphins with the camera technology is like, that's stuff you don't get to see, as Andrew was saying, and that you're bringing it to us to see is just
I think also marine mammals are an entry point for discussions with people about, marine conservation and life below the surface. They live at the interface between our lives and marine life. And so I think that they're important ambassadors. And so I always see an opportunity to talk to people about other things that we need to be concerned about that affects the lives of marine mammals.
absolutely. Yeah, well, I don't see any other questions, but I do see just so many um, comments of gratitude to you for giving us of your evening and your time, and not once, but now twice. And we'll get you down in person and roll out the red carpet with lots of stellar IPA along the way. And
I would really enjoy that. I would love to come in
yeah,
person. So,
just phenomenal presentation. Thank you for your work and your dedication,
yeah.
and
And thank you, Sarah and Trey, for hosting me and helping make this happen.
absolutely. Thank you,
Good.
thank you. Be well.
Okay.
Thank you, one and all. Remember, kick down a little donation for the Noyo Center, become a member, come and see our talks, visit us, reach out, and stay connected and stay happy. The outdoors and the beaches will do that for you. Keep working at staying positive. Thank you, everyone.
Yeah. Good night, everyone.
Good night.